My name's Monica, and I don't remember a time when my parents weren't fighting. Their screaming matches are some of my earliest memories, filling our house with tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. I was just a kid, but even then, I knew something was seriously wrong. I was 4 when everything came to a head. Mom and Dad's arguments had gotten worse, if that was even possible. One night, I woke up to the sound of shattering glass and my mom yelling, "That's it, Mark, I've had enough." The next morning, Dad was gone. Just like that, my family was torn in two. It didn't take long for Dad to move on. Within months, he'd remarried some woman named Caroline and moved across town. From then on, our relationship became a joke. He'd call on holidays, his voice distant and awkward like he was talking to a stranger, not his own kid. The rest of the year, the only sign I had of father was the monthly alimony check he sent to Mom. Mom, for her part, was a mess. Linda Thompson, once the picture of a happy housewife, now a single mother, struggling to keep it together. She threw herself into her work as a real estate agent, but it was obvious she was floundering. I was 7 when Mom started getting weird. She'd always been a bit impulsive, but this was different. One day, she came home with a bunch of books and DVDs about day trading. "This is it, Monica," she said, her eyes shining with a manic gleam that scared me a little. "We're going to be rich." For weeks, she was glued to her computer, muttering about stocks and trades. She'd forget to pick me up from school, or to make dinner. When I'd ask her to play with me, she'd wave me off. "Not now, sweetie. Mommy's working on our future." But our future wasn't looking too bright. I learned to fend for myself pretty quick. By 8, I could make my own meals, even if it was just a peanut butter sandwich, do my own laundry, and get myself ready for school. Mom was too caught up in her get-rich-quick schemes to notice. Things came to a head when I was 9. Mom burst into my room one day, her eyes wild with excitement. "I'm going on a trip to Bali. I've found someone who can help us, sweetie. He's going to show me how to unlock my luck chakra. This is going to change everything." I didn't know what a luck chakra was, but I knew it sounded like trouble. And just like that, I was shipped off to Aunt Rachel's, my mom's friend, while Mom chased her latest crazy scheme halfway across the world. For 6 long weeks, I lived with Aunt Rachel while Mom was off on her spiritual journey in Bali. Don't get me wrong, Rachel was great. She really tried to make things normal for me. "Come on, Monica," she'd say with forced cheerfulness every morning. "Time for summer camp." I'd drag myself out of bed, pretending to be excited about another day of crafts and organized fun while my mind was miles away, wondering what the hell Mom was doing on the other side of the world. Weekends with Rachel were better. We'd go to the zoo or the beach, and for a few hours, I could almost forget the mess my life had become. But then I'd catch her looking at me with pity in her eyes, and reality would come crashing back. When Mom finally came back, it was like she was a whole new person. Her eyes were bright, her smile wide, and she couldn't stop talking about positive thinking and manifesting wealth. "Monica, sweetie, our lives are about to change," she said, pulling me into a hug that smelled of incense and something else I couldn't quite place. "I've unlocked my true potential. You'll see." It started small. A lottery ticket here, a scratch card there. Mom would come home giddy with excitement over a $20 win, treating me to pizza and new clothes like we were millionaires. "See, Monica? The universe is rewarding us," she'd say, waving the ticket in the air like it was made of gold. I should have known it was too good to be true. Soon, the small bets weren't enough. That's when the casino trip started. The first time she went, she came home at dawn, reeking of cigarettes and cheap perfume, but grinning from ear to ear. "I won $500, she exclaimed, throwing a wad of cash on the kitchen table. "This is just the beginning, honey. Soon, we'll be living in a mansion." I forced a smile, but my stomach was in knots. Something told me this wasn't going to end well. As the weeks went by, Mom's trips to the casino became more frequent. Sometimes she'd win, coming home in a whirlwind of manic energy, talking a mile a minute about her system and how she'd cracked the code. But more often, she'd slink in quietly, her eyes red and puffy, smelling of booze and defeat. The good days were getting rarer, and the bad days, well, they were getting a lot worse. One weekend, Mom disappeared for 2 whole days. She left me with a stack of frozen dinners and a stern warning. "Remember, Monica, this is our little secret," she said, her eyes hard. "If anyone asks, I'm not feeling well and I'm resting in my room. Got it?" When she finally came home Sunday night, she looked like hell. Her clothes were rumpled, her hair a mess, and she couldn't even look me in the eye. "Mommy just had a bit of bad luck. But don't worry, it'll turn around soon. I can feel it." But it didn't turn around. The trips got longer, the losses bigger. I started dreading the sound of her key in the lock in the early hours of the morning. A quiet entry meant a good night at the tables. A slam meant losses, and those were happening more and more often. Grandma Elizabeth was like a breath of fresh air in the suffocating mess my life had become. She lived in the next state over, but she made a point of visiting every few months. Those visits became my lifeline, a glimpse of normalcy in the chaos. But they were also incredibly stressful. The minute we got word that Grandma was coming, Mom would go into full-on panic mode. "Monica," she'd yell, already pulling out cleaning supplies. "We need to get this place in shape. Your grandmother can't see it like this." And so began the frenzied cleaning sprees. We'd spend days scrubbing, dusting, and hiding evidence of Mom's hobby. Dirty dishes that had been piling up for weeks suddenly vanished. The overflowing ashtrays were emptied, and the lingering smell of stale smoke was masked with air freshener. But the worst part wasn't the cleaning, but the lying. "Now remember," Mom would coach me, her eyes hard and serious, "everything's great. I'm doing well at work, and we're very happy. Got it?" When Grandma Elizabeth would finally arrive, I'd plaster on a fake smile and pretend everything was just peachy. But inside, I was screaming. I wanted so badly to tell her the truth, to beg her to take me away from all this. But I couldn't. I couldn't betray Mom like that. Grandma Elizabeth didn't know that the money she kept sending us, money meant for my care and education, was going straight into the casinos. Mom would cash the checks and be out the door before the ink was dry, chasing that elusive big win that would solve all our problems. As I got older, it became harder to ignore the reality of our situation. There were days when the fridge stood empty, and I'd have to ration my school lunches to make them last through dinner. On my 12th birthday, Grandma Elizabeth made a gesture that would change everything. She came to visit, bringing with her a shiny new smartphone, the kind all the cool kids at school had. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," she said, handing me the gift-wrapped box. "Linda, I've got something for you too. I've opened a college fund for Monica. It's in your name since she's still a minor, but it's for her future. Just promise me you'll use it wisely." Mom nodded, tears in her eyes. "I swear, Elizabeth. I'll never touch that money for anything else. Monica's future means everything to me." As I hugged my grandmother goodbye later that day, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this was the turning point. Maybe now, with my future secure, Mom would finally get the help she needed. At first everything was fine. Mom started going to Gamblers Anonymous meetings, picked up some real estate clients again. I threw myself into my studies, daring to dream about college and a future free from the chaos of the past few years. But like all the times before, Mom's resolve didn't last. Within months, she was back to her old habits. The excuses started small. "I'm just too tired for the meeting tonight, honey. I'll go next week." But next week never came. Soon, she was disappearing for days at a time again, leaving me to fend for myself. I was 13 now, and I'd become scarily good at being the adult in our household. I could forge Mom's signature perfectly on school documents, a skill born from necessity rather than rebellion. I even taught myself to cook, whipping up simple meals from whatever I could scrounge up in our perpetually bare pantry. Anything to keep my stomach from growling during class. As I entered high school, I withdrew more and more, Making friends felt impossible. How could I invite anyone over when I never knew what state the house, or mom, would be in? The few times I tried to open up, I was met with blank stares or awkward silence. No one could understand what my life was really like. By 16, I was desperate for some control over my life. That's when I decided to get a job. The local coffee shop was hiring, and to my surprise, the manager hired me on the spot. That coffee shop became my sanctuary. For a few hours each day, I could pretend to be normal. Just another teen working her first job, not the daughter of a gambling addict, barely keeping her head above water. And the money, well, it wasn't much, but it was mine. But reality has a way of shattering even the most carefully constructed illusions. One night, after a late shift at the coffee shop, I came home to find the front door unlocked. Alarm bells went off in my head immediately. Mom might be irresponsible, but she always locked the door. The house was a disaster. Clothes strewn everywhere, dishes piled in the sink, and a smell I couldn't quite place hanging in the air. Then I heard it, muffled sobs coming from the living room. I found Mom sprawled on the floor, an empty wine bottle clutched to her chest like a lifeline. She was on the phone, her words slurred and barely coherent. "I've lost everything," she was saying, her voice breaking. "Just one more chance. I know I can turn it around with one big win." My blood ran cold. I knew, with a certainty that made me sick to my stomach, what she was talking about. I waited until Mom passed out, snoring on the living room floor, before I made my move. With shaking hands, I opened her laptop. It took me a few tries to find the right banking app and guess the password. But when I did, the truth hit me like a punch to the gut. The account was empty. Completely drained. Years of saving, Grandma's generous gift, my entire future, gone. I stormed into the living room where Mom was still passed out. I shook her awake, my hands trembling with rage. "Mom, wake up. We need to talk about the money." She blinked at me, confusion and pain etched across her face. "What? Monica, what are you talking about?" "The college fund, Mom. The one Grandma set up for me. The one you swore you'd never touch. It's gone." For a moment, she just stared at me. Then she tried to deny it, her voice weak and unconvincing. No, you must be mistaken. I would never." But as I laid out the evidence, the empty account, the late-night phone call I'd overheard, her denials crumbled. In their place, came the accusations. "You ungrateful brat," she screamed, her face contorted with rage and shame. "After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me? Snooping through my private information?" It was like a dam had burst. Years of resentment, fear, and disappointment came pouring out of both of us. We screamed and cried, hurling bitter words at each other like weapons. And then it happened. In a moment of blind fury, Mom's hand lashed out, catching me across the face. The force of the blow knocked me back, and I felt a sharp sting where her ring had cut my cheek. I raised a hand to my throbbing cheek, feeling the warm trickle of blood. Without a word, I turned and fled to my room, locking the door behind me. I slid down to the floor, my back against the door, and finally let the tears come. That night, I made a decision. I couldn't stay here anymore. I packed a backpack with some clothes and the little money I'd saved from my coffee shop job. As the first light of dawn crept through my window, I slipped out of the house without a backwards glance. When I showed up on Dad's doorstep, his reaction was lukewarm at best. He invited me in awkwardly, shooting apologetic glances at Caroline, his wife, who didn't even try to hide her annoyance at my presence. I poured out the whole story: Mom's gambling, the empty college fund, the fight. I watched Dad's face change from shock to anger and finally to a resigned weariness that made my heart sink. I spent that night in their guest room, feeling like an intruder in what should have been my second home. As I lay there, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, I realized I'd been foolish to hope for rescue. My suspicions were confirmed the next evening when I overheard Dad on the phone with Mom. You need to come get her, Linda, he hissed, his voice low but clear through the thin walls. This isn't my problem. I've been paying child support for years, that should have been more than enough to cover her education. I crept back to the guest room, my heart heavy with the final death of a hope I hadn't even realized I'd been clinging to. As I sat on the edge of the bed, I knew one thing for certain: I couldn't stay here. The next morning, I sat on the bus, my backpack clutched to my chest, watching the miles tick by. I was headed to Grandma Elizabeth's house in the next state over. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot I had left. My stomach churned with anxiety. What if Grandma turned me away too? What if Mom had already gotten to her with lies and excuses? I'd been let down so many times before, I wasn't sure I could handle another rejection. When I finally arrived at Grandma Elizabeth's house, my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I stood on her porch for what felt like hours, trying to work up the courage to knock. But I needn't have worried. The moment Grandma opened the door and saw me standing there, her face went from shocked to concerned to fiercely protective in the span of seconds. "Monica, sweetheart, what are you doing here? Are you all right?" Before I knew it, I was wrapped in her arms, sobbing out the whole miserable story. The gambling, the lies, the empty college fund, the fight with Mom, Dad's rejection, all of it came pouring out in a flood of tears and broken words. Grandma listened to it all, her face growing stormier with each revelation. When I finally finished, she cupped my face in her hands, her eyes blazing with determination. "You're safe now, honey," she said, her voice firm and reassuring. "We're going to fix this. Together." Grandma Elizabeth wasted no time. She called her friend who was a lawyer, discussing terms like paternal rights and gambling that made my head spin. But mostly, she was preparing for the confrontation I knew was coming. When Mom finally arrived, summoned by Grandma's demands, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked small and defeated, nothing like the towering figure of my childhood. But the moment she opened her mouth, I realized some things hadn't changed at all. "Elizabeth, thank goodness you called," Mom said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "I've been so worried about Monica. She's been acting out, telling wild stories. I just don't know what to do with her anymore. I've tried my best, but she's been so difficult, so ungrateful." But Grandma Elizabeth wasn't buying it. Without a word, she opened her laptop and pulled up the bank statements showing the now empty college fund. "Would you care to explain this, Linda?" Grandma asked, her voice ice cold. The color drained from Mom's face as she stared at the screen. Her mouth opened and closed a few times, but no sound came out. It was like watching a balloon deflate. "I can explain," she finally stammered. "Things have been tough, and I just needed to borrow a little. I was going to pay it back." But her excuses were weak, and she knew it. I could see the panic in her eyes as she realized she wasn't going to be able to lie her way out of this one. And then, in a last desperate attempt to regain control, Mom's face hardened. "You know what? I don't have to explain myself to you. I'm Monica's mother. That money was in my name. I had every right to spend it how I saw fit." Grandma Elizabeth's eyes flashed with a fierce determination I'd never seen before. She leaned forward, her voice low and dangerous. "You're right about one thing, Linda. There's no legal document stating that money was exclusively for Monica's education. It was a trust placed in you, which you betrayed. But let me be clear about what I can do." Mom's smug expression faltered as Grandma continued. "That house you've been living in? The one you've neglected for years? I bought that as an investment property. And I'm selling it. Immediately." Mom's face went pale. "You can't do that. Where will we live?" "We?" Grandma raised an eyebrow. "There is no we, Linda. The proceeds from the sale will go towards Monica's education and setting her up with a small apartment near her chosen college." I felt a surge of hope, quickly followed by fear as I saw Mom's face contort with rage. But Grandma wasn't finished. "Furthermore, I'm suing for custody of Monica." Your gambling addiction, financial abuse, and that little physical altercation you had? All grounds for termination of parental rights. The room fell silent. I held my breath, watching Mom's face as the reality of her situation sank in. For the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. What followed was a whirlwind of legal activity. Mom, faced with losing everything, fought back hard at first. She hired this slick lawyer who tried to paint me as some troubled teen and Grandma as a meddling old woman. But the evidence against Mom was overwhelming. My teachers came forward, talking about how my grades had slipped, how I'd sometimes come to school looking exhausted or hungry. My manager from the coffee shop testified about my work ethic, how I'd sometimes beg for extra shifts even when I was dead on my feet. With each testimony, I watched Mom shrink a little more in her seat. But the final blow came from an unexpected source. Mom's sponsor from Gamblers Anonymous broke the code of anonymity to testify. She stood up in court and laid it all out: Mom's severe addiction, her repeated relapses, her refusal to truly engage with the program. That was the moment Mom finally broke. As the sponsor spoke, I saw something crumble in Mom's eyes. When she took the stand, gone was the defiant, lying woman I'd known for years. In her place was someone small, broken, and finally, honest. "I have a problem," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've hurt my daughter. I've betrayed her trust. I've ruined everything." As I watched my mother break down on the stand, confessing to years of addiction and neglect, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of me was relieved to finally hear her admit the truth. Part of me was angry that it had taken this long, that it had to come to this. And part of me, a part one wasn't proud of, felt a grim satisfaction seeing her finally face the consequences of her actions. But mostly, I felt tired. So incredibly, bone-deep tired. As Mom's sobs echoed through the courtroom, I closed my eyes, hoping that somehow, some way, this nightmare was finally coming to an end. The judge's gavel came down with a finality that echoed through the courtroom. In the matter of custody for Monica Thompson, the court rules in favor of Elizabeth Thompson. Linda Thompson's parental rights are hereby terminated. Dad was given a chance to step up, to fight for custody, but he didn't even show up to the hearing. His lawyer simply stated that Mark Thompson would not be contesting Elizabeth's guardianship. Just like that, both my parents had washed their hands of me. True to her word, Grandma Elizabeth sold Mom's house. She combined the proceeds with her own savings to set up a new trust fund for my education. This time, it was ironclad: the money could only be used for tuition, books, and other school-related expenses. No one, not even Elizabeth herself, could touch it for anything else. As my high school graduation approached, Grandma and I spent our weekends getting ready for my next big step. She'd bought me a small apartment near the college I'd chosen, and we had fun picking out furniture and decorating it. As we worked, we talked about my plans for the future. I'd decided to major in social work, with a minor in psychology. After everything I'd been through, I wanted to help other kids who were struggling. But even as I settled into my new life, I couldn't shake the conflicting emotions that churned inside me. I was relieved to finally have stability, to know where my next meal was coming from and not have to worry about keeping the lights on. But I also felt guilty. What would happen to Mom now? And as much as I tried to push it down, I was angry. Angry at Mom for her addiction, at Dad for his indifference, at both of them for failing me so completely. Grandma, perceptive as always, noticed my struggle. "Honey," she said gently one day, "I think it might be good for you to talk to someone. A professional, I mean. Someone who can help you process everything that's happened." It wasn't easy. Dredging up old memories, confronting feelings I'd tried so hard to bury, some days I left my sessions feeling wrung out and raw. But slowly, I started to heal. I learned that it was okay to be angry, to be sad, to grieve for the childhood I never had. I learned that my parents' failures weren't my fault, and that I didn't owe them my forgiveness until I was ready to give it, if ever. As I packed up my things, ready to move into my new apartment and start my college journey, I made a difficult decision. I wasn't going to reach out to mom or dad. Not yet, maybe not for a long time. I needed to focus on myself, on building the life I wanted, free from their chaos and disappointment. As we drove towards my new apartment, towards my new life, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, I knew that. There would be tough days, days when the old pain and anger would resurface. But for the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt hope. Real, genuine hope for my future. I was Monica Thompson. I was a survivor. And now, finally, I had the chance to become so much more. My name's Sarah, and I've got a story to tell you. It all started when I was just a little kid, maybe 5 or 6. That's when my parents split up. Dad, his name's Mark, he couldn't take it anymore. Mom, Linda, she'd been riding his ass for years about not making enough money. Always putting him down, making him feel like shit. I remember this one time, Dad came home excited about a promotion at work. He was grinning from ear to ear, proud of himself for once. Mom just looked at him and said, "That's it? I thought you'd finally gotten a real job." The light just went out of his eyes. It was like watching someone deflate. So yeah, Dad left. Can't say I blame him now, looking back. But at the time, it felt like my whole world was falling apart. Mom, though? She saw an opportunity. Mom figured out pretty quick that being a poor, abandoned single mother could get her a lot of perks. At work, she'd lay it on thick with her boss. "I'm so sorry I'm late again, Mr. Johnson," she'd sniffle. Sarah was sick, and with no one to help. Mr. Johnson would pat her hand and tell her not to worry. Meanwhile, I was perfectly fine, spending the morning watching cartoons while Mom did her hair and makeup. Family gatherings were the worst. Mom would hold court, dramatically recounting how Dad had left us with nothing. I'd squirm in my seat, uncomfortable with the lie, but not daring to speak up. Even at that age, I knew better than to contradict Mom in public. What no one knew was that Dad was sending money every month. Child support, he called it. Mom would scoff when the checks came in. "Look at this, Sarah," she'd say, waving the paper in my face. "Your father thinks this pittance is enough to raise a child on." Pathetic. I didn't know how much it was supposed to be. All I knew was that it made Mom angry, and when Mom was angry, life got harder for me. As the years went by, I started noticing things. Like how Mom would look at me sometimes, her eyes narrowing like she was seeing something she didn't like. Later, I realized it was because I looked too much like Dad. It brought back memories for her, and not the good kind. But she kept me around. I was useful, you see. The picture of the struggling single mom and her brave little girl was too good to pass up. It got her sympathy, special treatment, even some government assistance. Then, when I was about 10, everything changed again. Mom met Richard. Rich, successful Richard. Suddenly, being a struggling single mom wasn't so appealing anymore. No, now she had a new image to cultivate. The devoted wife of a prominent businessman. And I didn't fit into that picture so well. It started small at first. Mom would forget to wash my clothes, leaving me with nothing clean to wear to school. I'd show up in wrinkled, stained outfits, my face burning with shame as the other kids whispered and pointed. Then came the food situation. Mom would cook these elaborate meals for her and Richard, filling the house with mouth-watering smells. But when I'd come to the table, she'd frown. "Oh, Sarah, I'm sorry. I didn't make enough for 3. Why don't you make yourself a sandwich?" I'd retreat to the kitchen, my stomach growling as I slapped together a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Through the door, I could hear Mom and Richard laughing, the clink of wine glasses a stark contrast to my meager meal. The worst was when she started messing with my schoolwork. I'd spend hours on an assignment, only to have it disappear the next morning. I'd show up to class empty-handed, stammering excuses to my teacher. My grades started to slip, and the teachers began giving me concerned looks. Through it all, Richard remained oblivious. He was always buried in his work, and when he wasn't, his attention was solely on Mom. She'd simper and coo at him, playing the part of the adoring wife. "Richard, darling, you work so hard," she'd say, massaging his shoulders. "You deserve to relax." He'd smile up at her, completely under her spell. "What would I do without you, Linda?" Things got even worse when Mom announced she was pregnant. Richard was over the moon, and Mom milked it for all it was worth. "The doctor says I need plenty of rest," she'd tell me, lounging on the couch. "Be a dear and tidy up the house, won't you?" I'd spend my afternoons cleaning while Mom napped or chatted with her friends on the phone. When Richard came home, she'd struggle to her feet, one hand on her barely there bump. "Oh, honey, I'm so tired," she'd sigh. "Growing a baby is hard work." Richard would rush to her side, all concern. "Sit down, my love. Sarah, bring your mother some water." As the months wore on, I felt more and more isolated. At school, I withdrew from my friends, too embarrassed to invite them over. At home, I was little more than a servant, expected to cater to Mom's every whim. One night, as I lay in bed listening to Mom and Richard cooing over nursery designs, something in me snapped. I couldn't do this anymore. I needed out. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and did something I'd never dared to do before. I called my dad and told him everything. The neglect, the mind games, the constant feeling of being unwanted. Dad listened in silence, only the sound of his breathing telling me he was still there. When I finally ran out of words, there was a long pause. "Pack your bags," he said at last, his voice hard. "I'm coming to get you." The next morning, I woke up early, my heart pounding with a mix of excitement and fear. I had already packed my bags the night before, unable to sleep from anticipation. As I dragged my suitcase down the stairs, I heard Mom's voice from the kitchen. "Going somewhere, Sarah?" I froze, expecting a confrontation. But when I turned, I saw Mom leaning against the doorframe, a strange smile on her face. She looked relieved. "I'm going to live with Dad," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. To my shock, Mom's smile widened. "Well, it's about time," she said, her tone almost cheerful. "Richard and I could use the extra space for the baby." Her words hit me like a slap, but before I could respond, I heard a car horn outside. Dad was here. Mom walked me to the door, that unsettling smile still in place. "Have a good life, Sarah," she said, practically shooing me out. As I walked to Dad's car, I glanced back. Mom stood in the doorway, looking frankly joyful as she waved goodbye. It was the happiest I'd seen her in years, and it was because I was leaving. Dad's apartment was small, but it felt more like home than anywhere I'd lived in years. However, we wouldn't be there for long. Over the next few months, I watched in awe as Dad's business took off like a rocket. It seemed like every week brought news of a new contract, a big client, or an expansion. Within a year, we were house hunting in the city's most exclusive neighborhoods. The house we ended up buying was nothing short of spectacular. 3 stories of modern architecture, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a backyard that looked like something out of a magazine. My room was bigger than our entire old apartment. While Dad worked long hours managing his now booming business, I threw myself into making our big house a home. I learned to cook gourmet meals, filling the place with amazing smells. I kept things tidy, managed the household staff, even started a vegetable garden in our spacious backyard. As the months passed, I watched Dad's hard work continue to pay off. His business kept growing, and with it, our lifestyle improved even more. I transferred to the most prestigious private school in the city. On my 16th birthday, Dad surprised me with a car. Not just any car, but a brand new luxury SUV. "Now you can drive yourself to school in style," he said, tossing me the keys. "And maybe run some errands for your old man?" As I settled into my new life, I thought about Mom less and less. She never tried to contact me, and I made no effort to reach out to her or any of my maternal relatives. The wounds were still too raw, the memories too painful. Instead, I focused on my studies. Years passed, and before I knew it, I was graduating college with honors. As I stood on that stage, accepting my diploma, I searched the crowd for Dad's face. He was there, beaming with pride, and for a moment, I forgot to breathe. This was what it felt like to be loved, truly and unconditionally. After the ceremony, Dad pulled me aside. "I've got something for you," he said, his eyes twinkling with excitement. He handed me a small box. Inside was a key. "It's for your new apartment. In the city center. Consider it a graduation gift." Tears welled up in my eyes as I hugged him fiercely. "Thank you, Dad, for everything." It had been a few years since I graduated from college. My career was taking off, I had a beautiful apartment in the city, and life was good. Dad and I had settled into a comfortable routine of weekly dinners and long phone calls. Everything was perfect. Until it wasn't. The news came like a thunderbolt out of a clear sky. Dad was sick. Cancer. Advanced. The doctor's words blurred together in a haze of medical jargon, but the gist was clear: it was bad. From that moment on, my world narrowed to a singular focus: saving Dad. I took a leave of absence from work, moving back into his house to take care of him. Every waking moment was devoted to his care. I researched treatments, consulted specialists, tried alternative therapies. Anything that might give us a fighting chance. The months that followed were a brutal cycle of hope and despair. For every good day, when Dad felt strong enough to sit in the garden or share a meal, there were 3 bad ones filled with pain and nausea from the treatments. One evening, as I was helping him back to bed after a particularly rough day, he turned to me with a serious look. "Sarah," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need you to promise me something." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "Promise me you'll live your life. Really live it. Don't let this hold you back." I wanted to argue, to tell him he was going to be fine, but we both knew better. So instead, I squeezed his hand and said, "I promise, Dad." He died 2 weeks later. I was holding his hand when he took his last breath, telling him how much I loved him, how grateful I was for everything he'd done for me. The next few days passed in a blur. I felt numb, going through the motions of arranging the funeral. There were so many details to handle: the casket, the flowers, the obituary. It all felt surreal, like I was planning an event for someone else. I was at the funeral home, trying to decide on music for the service, when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Hello? Sarah? It's your mother." I nearly dropped the phone. After all these years of silence, she was calling now? "What do you want?" I asked, my voice cold. "I heard about Mark," she said, her voice softer than I remembered. "I'm so sorry, sweetie. I'd like to help. With the funeral arrangements, I mean." I wanted to hang up. To tell her to go to hell. But I was so tired, so overwhelmed. And a tiny part of me, a part one thought I'd buried long ago, yearned for a mother's comfort. "Okay," I heard myself say. "You can help." As I ended the call, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just opened a door I should have kept firmly shut. But with Dad gone, Mom was the only family I had left. Mom arrived at the funeral home an hour after our call, with my half-brother Thomas in tow. The kid was about 13 now, gangly and awkward. I watched as Mom fussed over him, straightening his tie, smoothing his hair. It was like a knife to the gut, seeing her shower Thomas with the affection I'd been denied my entire childhood. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. Despite my reservations, I put her to work. To my surprise, Mom turned out to be surprisingly helpful, managing the catering, arranging the flowers, dealing with the endless parade of well-wishers. The funeral itself was a blur. I remember standing there, numb, as people I barely knew came up to offer condolences. Linda stayed close, her hand occasionally touching my arm in what I suppose was meant to be a comforting gesture. It felt strange, this sudden maternal presence after years of neglect. After the service, as people were filing out of the cemetery, Linda approached me again. "Sarah, I know this might not be the best time, but I'd like to stay in touch. Maybe we could get coffee sometime?" I stared at her, this woman who had made my childhood a living hell, who had been thrilled to see me leave. But she was also the only family I had left. "Maybe," I said finally. "I'll think about it." To my surprise, Linda kept her word. In the weeks that followed, she called regularly, her voice always tinged with concern. "How are you holding up, sweetie?" she'd ask. "Is there anything you need?" At first, I was guarded, giving short, non-committal answers. But as the days wore on and the reality of Dad's absence set in, I found myself craving any kind of connection. Even if it was with Linda. Our conversation started simple enough. She'd ask about my job, my apartment, my friends. But gradually, her questions began to shift. "Your father's business," she'd say casually. "I hope it's not causing you too much stress. Mark always worked so hard." I'd deflect, changing the subject. The truth was, I was still trying to wrap my head around everything Dad had left me. The company, the real estate portfolio, it was overwhelming. And something in me, some instinct honed by years of Linda's manipulations, told me to keep quiet about it. As weeks turned into months, Linda's hints became less subtle. "Thomas is looking at colleges," she mentioned during one call. "The tuition these days, it's just astronomical. I don't know how we're going to manage it." I made a non-committal noise, my guard instantly up. Another time, it was, "Richard's had some setbacks at work. The economy, you know. It's hitting everyone hard." Each conversation seemed to circle back to money, to the struggles they were facing. And each time, I could feel the unspoken expectation hanging in the air. Despite my initial reservations, Linda's persistent displays of maternal affection began to wear down my defenses. Against my better judgment, I started providing small amounts of financial assistance. It started innocently enough, helping Thomas with his SAT prep courses, buying Linda a new laptop when hers broke down, even covering a month's rent when Richard's company went through a rough patch. "You're an angel, Sarah," Linda would gush. "I don't know what we'd do without you." Each time, I felt a warmth in my chest. Was this what it felt like to have a real family? Meanwhile, I threw myself into running Dad's company. I made his longtime deputy the director, staying on as the owner and reserving the right to make all important decisions. It was challenging work, but I felt closer to Dad every time I sat in his old office. As the months passed, Linda's requests grew more frequent and more substantial. What started as occasional help turned into regular expectations. The breaking point came on a sunny Tuesday afternoon. I was knee-deep in quarterly reports when Linda called. "Sarah, darling," she began, her voice dripping with sweetness. "We've been thinking. It's been so long since we had a proper family vacation. We found this amazing package deal for a European tour." I felt my stomach drop. "Linda, I don't know." "It would mean so much to Thomas," she interrupted. "And after all we've been through, don't you think we deserve a little happiness?" Guilt warred with resentment in my chest. Before I knew it, I'd agreed to fund their trip. But it didn't stop there. The day after they returned, Linda was on the phone again. "Now, about Thomas's college fund," she said, her tone no longer sweet but demanding. "We'll need you to set that up right away. He's got his heart set on Princeton, you know." Something in me snapped. All the years of neglect, the emotional abuse, the manipulation, it all came rushing back. "No," I said, my voice shaking. "No more, Mom. I'm done." There was a pause, then Linda's voice came back, cold and hard. "After everything we've done for you? You ungrateful little scum. How dare you turn your back on your family?" I laughed, a bitter sound. "Family? You mean the mother who was thrilled to see me leave? The one who made my childhood a living hell?" The argument escalated quickly. Linda dropped all pretense of affection, hurling accusations and insults. I gave as good as I got, years of pent-up anger and hurt pouring out. "You're just like your father," she spat. "Selfish and cold-hearted." "Thank God for that," I shot back. "At least he loved me." The line went dead. I stood there, shaking, my phone clutched in my hand. The silence that followed was deafening. When the opportunity for a month-long business trip abroad came up, I jumped at it. A chance to get away, to clear my head. As I boarded the plane, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. Maybe this was what I needed, some time and distance to figure things out. After a month away, I was looking forward to the comfort of my own bed. The business trip had been successful but exhausting, and all I wanted was to kick off my shoes and relax in my apartment. But as I turned the key in the lock, something felt off. The door swung open to reveal a completely different apartment. Gone were my carefully chosen furnishings, replaced by unfamiliar decor. A startled couple stared at me from the couch. "Who are you?" I demanded, my heart racing. "What are you doing in my apartment?" The man stood up, looking confused. "Your apartment? We bought this place a couple of weeks ago. From a woman named Linda, I think?" The world tilted on its axis. "Linda. My mother. No, it couldn't be." "There must be some mistake," I said, my voice shaking. "I never sold this apartment. I've been out of the country." The couple exchanged worried glances. "We have all the paperwork," the woman said hesitantly. "Maybe you should talk to your realtor?" I stumbled out of the apartment, my mind reeling. My first instinct was to call the police, report a fraud. But a nagging voice in my head told me to confront Mom first. I needed to hear it from her. With trembling fingers, I dialed her number. It rang once, twice. "Hello, Sarah," Mom's voice was sickeningly sweet. "How was your trip?" "Cut the crap, Mom," I snarled. "What did you do to my apartment?" There was a pause, then to my shock, Linda laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh, Sarah," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "If you had just shared your wealth willingly, it wouldn't have come to this. You brought this on yourself, you know." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. You sold my apartment? How could you?" "I'll go to the police, You'll what?" Linda interrupted, her tone suddenly sharp. "Report your own mother to the authorities? Please. We both know you don't have the spine for that." The call ended, leaving me standing on the sidewalk, homeless and in shock. But Linda's smug certainty had ignited a fire in me. Without thinking, I hailed a cab and gave the driver Linda and Richard's address. I pounded on the door, adrenaline coursing through my veins. Richard answered, his face a mask of confusion. "Sarah, what's going on?" I pushed past him into the house. "Where's Linda?" I demanded. "She's out," Richard said, still looking bewildered. "Sarah, what's this about?" In a rush, I told him everything, the apartment, Linda's confession, all of it. As I spoke, I watched the color drain from Richard's face. "But, that's impossible," he stammered. "We don't need money for Thomas's education. I've already set aside funds for that." We stared at each other, the truth dawning on us both. With shaking hands, Richard began pulling out financial statements, credit card bills. As we pored over them, a horrifying picture emerged. Mom secretly took out loans, and now she is mired in debt. "I had no idea," Richard whispered, looking shell-shocked. "All this time." I felt a strange mix of vindication and pity. Richard had been just as deceived as I had been. As the full extent of Linda's deception became clear, I felt a cold resolve settle over me. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was fraud, plain and simple. I didn't hesitate. The moment I hung up with the 911 operator, a weight lifted off my shoulders. For too long, I'd been Mom's victim. Not anymore. The investigation that followed was brutal but necessary. Every rock overturned revealed more of Linda's deceptions. She hadn't just forged my signature to sell my apartment, she'd been living a complete double life. Credit card statements revealed extravagant purchases, designer clothes, luxury spa treatments, five-star hotels. All hidden from Richard, all financed through a web of lies and secret loans. The trial became a media circus. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, hungry for every sordid detail. I hated the attention, but part of me savored seeing Linda's carefully crafted image crumble in the public eye. In the end, justice prevailed. Mom was found guilty on all counts: fraud, forgery, the works. The judge's words still ring in my ears. Mrs. Linda Harrison, your actions show a blatant disregard for the law and a shocking betrayal of your family's trust. I sentence you to 3 years in prison, with an order to repay the full value of the fraudulently sold apartment to Sarah Harrison. Richard, bless him, was shell-shocked throughout the whole ordeal. The day after the sentencing, he called me. "Sarah," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I'm filing for divorce. And I'm seeking full custody of Thomas. After what she's done, I can't let her near him." In the aftermath, I found myself rebuilding my life once again. The apartment money was returned, and I bought a small house on the outskirts of the city. A fresh start. I threw myself into running Dad's company, honoring his legacy the best way I knew how. The work was challenging, but rewarding. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was truly standing on my own 2 feet. Thomas and I keep in touch. He's in college now, studying engineering, with Richard's support. It's bittersweet, but I'm glad we have a chance at some kind of relationship. As for Linda, I haven't heard from her since the trial. I don't know if she's tried to reach out, and honestly, I don't want to know. That chapter of my life is closed.